an introduction to Epicureanism. Okay, that's what you should be seeing. And if you, I mean, just real quick, why don't you guys give me a +1 if you guys can see in your screen? It should be a purple background that says an introduction to Epicureanism. Okay, great. And the fact that you're giving me a +1 means that, of course, that you can hear my audio perfectly fine. So let's get cracking. Now, Epicureanism is a philosophy that was founded by Epicurus, right? And in the, what was it? It was like the third, I forgot the dates, actually, like the 3rd or 4th century BC. It's not really important. The important thing is that it was attacked by a lot of different elements because it was basically caricatured as hedonistic. That all that the Epicureans wanted to do was just, you know, hookers and blow, or the equivalent thereof in ancient Greece and in Roman times. That they were just hedonists, and hedonism got a very bad word, bad vibe, right? Bad reputation. Hedonism, you know, just living for pleasure is just awful, and you should never do that. And a lot of people, myself included, gravitate towards Stoicism. Stoicism is the idea of accepting difficulty and pain and living through it and working through it. The patron saint of the Stoics is Marcus Aurelius and his meditations. I read the meditations and I had it in my book bag for years. I read it when I was like 19, or I bought it when I was 19. And I held on to that book and read it off and on for years. And it was a big influence on me when I was young. And it's a big influence, Stoicism is a big influence on a lot of guys who are young, because it appeals to an innate nature that we have, young men have, of wanting to sacrifice themselves to something greater than themselves. It's a very powerful urge. It's the reason that, you know, high school football players, right? They're so crazy about the team. And those guys who are on the high school football team talk about it incessantly for decades afterwards, because it fulfills this need that young men have of believing in something larger than themselves and sacrificing themselves to that thing that is larger than themselves. And as an older man, I understand what's going on. As an older man, I realize that what the young men want is a place where they belong, where they fit in the sense that they are appreciated and respected. And they in turn appreciate and respect the environment in which they are in, the social environment in which they are in. Okay? It's a very important thing that our contemporary society does not give many young men. And because of that, so many young men feel extremely dissatisfied. And they look on with envy to those guys who are on the high school football team or the lacrosse team or the swim team or whatever other sports team. Young men who are not so physically gifted, and therefore they're not on those teams, and they feel left out and they feel worthless. And it hurts them because, see, in our reptilian brain, we feel that if we are not a part of that group, we're not going to have collective security. We're going to be isolated. We might be injured or attacked by a predator or some other competing tribe because we are not accepted by the social group, by the team, see? And we feel that and we lack it, and it hurts us. It hurts us in our soul because we feel that we're adrift, okay? And Stoicism appeals to that nature and basically tells young men, you're just going to have to grit your teeth and carry on. And you're just going to have to accept that suffering. And you see, that's a key component of youth, of being a young man, of wanting to suffer, not in a masochistic, sick kind of way, but in a sense of like, I am going to suffer to show you how much I want to belong, to show you how much I want to do good by the group that has embraced me. Soldiers on a battlefield, young men, they will die for one another happily. And they will run any risk and you know, cross the no man's land between the trenches in order to save their comrades. And they do it in a self-conscious way because they want to show the other men of their platoon or their battalion or their division that they honor that place that they have, and they're going to give themselves to show how much they appreciate it. Mm-hmm. But as you get to be older, you become more independent. You're more independent, and you don't really need the group to give you a sense of identity. In my own case, I'll be very frank with you. When I was a young man, I didn't have any group to which to belong to, any team that accepted me. And so because of that, I felt very isolated and very lonely. It was very difficult. But I got used to it. I got used to it and accepted it, but not in a stoic sense. Stoicism helped me when I was young to accept that loneliness. But as I got older, I just sort of like decided, fuck it, I'm just going to live for myself. And I started realizing that most people are in our contemporary culture living for ourselves. And it was only recently, I mean, really recently, just the last few weeks, that I've been getting into Epicureanism in a big way. And I'm starting to understand Epicureanism, because I thought that Epicureanism was just hedonism, just living for the moment, you know, hookers and blow, that kind of naive appreciation of Epicureanism. And not even appreciation, sort of like a naive disdain, because there was always this sense that the Epicureans are decadent because they're living for pleasure. They're living for hedonistic pleasure, I thought, because I really hadn't looked into it, not carefully. But for various reasons, I came across the text of Lucretius, the 1st century BC Roman poet, who wrote on the nature of things. And I'll get to him in just a moment. But the point about Lucretius is that as I started to read him, and I started to understand what Epicureanism really was, I started to realize that so many of the conclusions that I had arrived at were basically Epicurean conclusions and ideas that I had come up on my own, but which were matched by Epicureanism. I started to realize that Epicureanism, in a very real sense, is a very, very comforting philosophical paradigm, or a set of philosophical beliefs. Now, why would you want to have a set of philosophical beliefs that gives you comfort? See? Because you see, we live in a life that is, in a very real sense, meaningless. And we yearn for meaning so that we can understand what is going on in our lives. And so if a philosophy can give us such an explanation, even if it's an explanation that basically says life is meaningless, which Epicureanism does, well, that gives us comfort, because there is a sense that somebody before us has thought about these issues and arrived at conclusions. And we follow these conclusions and we nod our heads and we say, yes, I agree with these conclusions. And so because of that, because we are treading the same ground that some bigger thinker than ourselves came across, came through with a machete, cutting a path for us. And we read this path, we read these books, these philosophies, and they give us comfort. And so we start to understand, well, you know, this is life. This is the explanation that this man, who was a very smart man in his day, wrote about, and the conclusions he arrived at. And because of it, that's what he thinks. And in fact, it's what I think. I agree with him. And Epicureanism is basically a philosophy that I agree with. And I'm going to explain what the philosophy is and why I agree with it. And I think that it'll help you. At least that's the intention of this webinar. Okay, so let me get started. Here is, as usual, the outline. Here's the full outline of this, but there's actually going to be a second one where I'm going to talk about hedonism, but I'll get to that in just a moment, okay? Now, how did I come, to believe, or not believe, but agree with Epicureanism? Okay, it was, like I said, reading Lucretius on the nature of things. Now, the dictionary definition of Epicureanism is, Epicureanism rejects determinism and advocates hedonism, that is, pleasure as the highest good, but of a restrained kind. Mental pleasure is regarded more highly than physical, and the ultimate pleasure is held to be freedom from anxiety and mental pain. Notice that. This is the dictionary definition of Epicureanism, and it's essentially correct. The ultimate pleasure is freedom from anxiety and mental pain. That's the ultimate pleasure, especially that anxiety and mental pain that arises from needless fear of death and of the gods. Okay? Now that's what Epicureans basically thought, and it's fundamentally accurate. But as you start going into it, you start realizing that it's really very smart. Now, the first thing I want to get out of the way right away is the scientism of the Epicureanism. Now, the Epicureans, like all philosophies, looked at the natural world and they tried to make sense of it. But of course, they had limited technology. Yet the Epicureans were very, very clever in many ways, and they came to certain conclusions, some deductive conclusions that are remarkable. The first major one is that they came to the conclusion, for various reasons that are not important for this conversation, that there are only two things in existence. There is matter and there is void, which is essentially what science today tells us. There is matter and there is nothingness, the nothingness of space. And the Epicureans came to the conclusion that things are made up of atoms. They came to the conclusion that atoms are the smallest indivisible pieces of things, and that combinations of atoms created the matter around us. They were the ones who first came with the notion of the atom. In fact, they defined the word, okay? So they are not insignificant in the history of science. Now, a lot of other things that they wrote about in science were incorrect, but they were incorrect because they did not have the technology, they did not have the telescopes, they did not have the measuring tools and whatnot that we today are privileged enough to have, and therefore are able to understand the physical reality around us in a way that Epicureans could not. That's not really important. And to begrudge them the fact that they had certain ideas about astronomy and whatnot that are incorrect, it's not really important. And in point of fact, they themselves had an explanation as to why they were probably wrong, and I'll get to it in just a moment, and why the fact that they were probably wrong is no big deal, okay? So anyway, their science, the science of the Epicureans, was pretty much on point, especially in the major issue of matter and void and the atoms, okay? Now, the Epicureans were agnostic. Now, what does agnosticism mean? It means that you're not sure if gods exist or not. But the Epicureans were a little bit more on point. They weren't sure if God or gods existed or not. But they did know that, and they didn't know rather, that if God, singular, or the gods, plural, had created the universe. They had no idea either the existence or if they were the prime mover, the creator of the universe. But what they did know is that either God or the gods did not interfere in human affairs. They simply did not. And some people might claim miracles and whatnot, but a lot of times those miracles, the Epicureans said, could be explained by normal physical phenomena. And so, for all intents and purposes, God or gods do not care about human things, human affairs. And they, because of that, because they do not care about human affairs, more likely than not, if God or the gods exist, they or it or he or she does not care about human beings generally or a human being specifically. Gods, if they exist, are completely indifferent to us. And they posited the issue of an anthill. You see an anthill, right? And you're a big, tall, strapping man, right? You're 6 foot tall and whatnot, and you see an anthill, and the little ant is what, barely a quarter of an inch long, if that, an eighth of an inch, right? Crawling away, right? And there are a whole bunch of them, maybe, okay? You look at all those ants, do you care about them one way or the other? Not really. Do you care about what they do, what the individual ant is doing? Not at all. You could really care less. You might examine one for your own entertainment or amusement, or perhaps because you want to understand ants generally, but it's disinterested. Disinterested in the sense that you know that the ant cannot affect you. It's just a little ant, and you can step on it and it's gone. And so the Epicureans were of the opinion that if God or the gods exist, they view us as we view ants, as insignificant. and that do not affect them in any way. And they would not bother with us for the same reason that we don't bother with ants. Not because we can't, but because we have better things to do with our time. I mean, really, do you, get down on your hands and knees and look at one particular ant and start talking to it and trying to figure out its motivations and whatnot and help it in its little life? No. See? And that's what the Epicureans thought. Therefore, God or the gods do not care about a person's moral behavior. This is important, see? Since the gods don't really care about your destiny because you are insignificant to that, assuming they exist, of course. They don't care what you do. They do not. To them, you're nothing, even if they exist, okay? So they don't care about your moral behavior, what you do and whatnot. And of course, they're not going to punish you for it, even if they are infinite, because you are insignificant to them. That's the point, okay? Now, there's something else that the Epicureans do, okay? They reject the immortal soul. They do not deny that people have a soul or a spirit. And this appeals to me very much because I do believe that people have like a spirit, like an essence, like a soul. But they said that once the body dies, the soul goes with it. The soul ceases to exist. The spirit of the individual ceases to exist. And they believe that. And I believe it, to tell you the truth. I do not believe that our spirit endures somehow. It perhaps can endure in a metaphoric sense in the memory of those people we have left behind. But as an individual entity, our spirit, our soul, like a blob of floating something or other, no, it doesn't. It's gone. Once our physical bodies are gone, we're gone. And it goes back to the Epicureans' notion of matter and void, because they believe that the soul, the essence of the human being, is in their body. And once that body is destroyed, once there is void, the soul goes with it. Because the soul is immaterial, therefore it's void. There's nothing. And I very much believe that. Now, because of this notion that souls are not immortal, that they vanish with the body, then the natural corollary is that, see, there was a time before you existed when there was nothing. And therefore, there is going to be a time after you exist, and you will be nothing. It's called the symmetry argument, okay? The symmetry argument is that, see, there is your life, and before your life, okay, or from your point of view, before your life, right? Before your life, there was nothing. It was a void, okay? This whole period, okay, of infinite time stretching back before you existed. There was nothing. I mean, do you remember 1,000 years ago? 1,000,000 years ago? Of course not. You can barely remember when you were a small child, okay? But I mean, you don't remember before you were born because there was nothing. You did not exist before you were born. Of course not. And your soul, assuming it existed, it didn't exist before you were born, before you were conceived. There was a time before your existence. And therefore, there's going to be a time after your existence. And after your existence, it will be a void as well. This time that we have, that's it. There is nothing before our lives, and there will be nothing after. And there isn't going to be a hell or a heaven. And this is a key thing of the Epicureans. See, they say that the fear of death, not of the moment of dying, which they understand, and I'll get to that in just a moment, but they say the fear of death, of being afraid of non-existence, is silly. Just as when you didn't exist, was there pain? Was there misery in your non-existence? No, of course not. You just simply didn't exist. Before you were born, before you were conceived, there was nothing because you hadn't existed yet. And once you die, there will be nothing. There will be no pain, no pleasure, but nothing, truly nothing. Of course, we don't want to die a painful death. We don't want to be like, I don't know, torn apart by wild horses or some shit like that, right? I mean, that's understandable. You fear a painful death. That's one thing. But to fear the state of being dead, it's foolish, according to the Epicureans, because there's nothing. Now, this for me, when I read this, had a huge impact. And this is just recently, actually, because I came across my point of insertion into Epicureanism, really studying it, was this notion of the symmetrical argument, the argument that there's a time before you existed and a time after you existed. And it's symmetrical, like the pages of a book. And that notion, I found it very appealing, because when I was like about 13 years old, I remember very clearly, I was lying in my bed on like an afternoon. It could have been a weekend or after school, I forgot. And I was reading a book. I forget what book I was reading. I was fully clothed. My bed was all made up. I had like a bed cover, which had the logos of all the US football teams, right? And I was like lying there in bed, and for some reason I sort of like zoned out and kind of like forgot about what I was reading and just zoned out, the way you do when you're a kid, when you get bored and you're just like zoned out. And there was this moment that was the weirdest thing. It was like my brain kind of like completely shut down, shut off, just like done. Okay. It's not working. Like my brain just shut the fuck down. It was like a brief moment. It could not have been very long. Okay. I mean, it could have been seconds or it could have been a couple of minutes. I don't know, but it wasn't a particularly long period of time, what I'm saying. But in that moment of just being so zoned out that I was completely blank, I was completely egoless. There's no conception of who I was. And in that moment, I remember thinking, after it had happened, I remember thinking back on that moment of just blankness, of just totally zoned out. I thought to myself, and very consciously, and I remember it very clearly, it was a very important moment of my life, to tell you the truth, although at the moment I didn't realize it. But retrospectively, I realized how important it was. I realized that's what death feels like. Nothing. There's nothing. It's just blank. Okay? And it gave me a tremendous source of comfort. And since then, to tell you the truth, I've never once thought about death. Of course, I don't want to suffer a painful death, okay? But fear of not existing anymore, I don't have that because of this experience. And it was a truly transcendent experience that I only now, as a far older man, and this is 40 years ago, only now I look back on it and realize how truly important this moment was. Because at this moment when I was, like I said, 13 or 14 years old, I so blanked out that there was like no thought in my head, nothing, It was just one of those weird little things that happen to you when you're young, right? Perhaps there was some like little circuit break or whatever the fuck in my head, but it was not serious, of course, I didn't go psychotic or any shit like that, right? It was just like a little gap in my consciousness. If my stream of consciousness is like a line, it was like this little, like somebody had taken an eraser and just erased a little bit of it, okay? And in that little gap, there was absolutely nothing. And that sense of realizing that that's what death felt like has given me comfort all through the years since then. And I've never really thought about death or worried about it. I know that if I die, if it's unexpected, if I get hit by a bus or whatever, I hope it's quick and not painless, and not painful rather. But that's the only thing I'm concerned about, that it not being particularly painful. But the death itself, non-existence, when I am no longer alive, it's of no concern, no worries because of this moment. And when I was reading Epicurus, the Epicureans rather, I was reading Lucretius, that's when I thought to myself, they get it. Or either I fall in line with them or they are hitting on the truth. I tend to think that, to myself, that I'm one of the great things that I have is that I never hold on to an idea if it's a bad idea. if it's a bad idea or a refutable idea, or I come across evidence that shows that the idea is wrong or incorrect somehow, or that there's a better idea, I drop the old idea. Like a hot rock. I have zero loyalty to incorrect ideas. And it's probably because when I was very young, as I think I've told you this before, I was very much into math. And in math, there is always the correct answer or a set of correct answers, a finite set of correct answers, even if the answer is infinity, but infinity as a concept is finite. There's a finite set of correct answers in math. And because of that knowledge, I've always been very quick to drop an incorrect idea, because it would be like me thinking, oh yeah, 2 + 2 is 5. And then being shown that no, 2 + 2 is 4. And why on earth would I continue thinking that 2 + 2 is 5? That's incorrect. And I just dropped that idea like a rock. Same thing. And this notion that death is nothingness, it stood with me for years. And all of these notions that there's a heaven or there's a hell or there's a God or what have you, that there's something after, I always found them to be pretty lies, pretty fictions that we tell ourselves, especially those people who are afraid of death, so as to comfort them. And I never had that need. And that's why I never deviated from my notion that death is just nothing. There's just nothing there. And when I came across Epicureanism, I thought, these guys get it. These guys get it. In 40 years, I've never come across a better explanation to what death is. That's it. It's simple as that. There is nothing. And therefore, because there is nothing, this life that we are living of consciousness, that's why it's so valuable, okay? Because it's this brief moment that we experience. And because of it, because a lot of times you don't realize how valuable what it is that we have truly is. I mean, when you have a car, a working car, you don't realize how valuable it is until all of a sudden the car breaks down or the car is stolen and you're forced to take a bus or walk. And then you realize how valuable the car really is, right? Well, if you truly think and consider the fact that there was a period of time before your life when you didn't exist, and there will be a time after your life when you will not exist, when you consider this, truly think about it. The life that you are living, the consciousness that you have, you realize how precious it is. And you start thinking to yourself of how badly you are mismanaging it. And you think to yourself how you have to use it better, manage it better, because this window of consciousness is all you get. And like I always say, the days are long, but the decades are short. Fucking A, you'll be gone before you know it. And so therefore, the Epicureans thought to themselves, consider the fact that you didn't exist before you were born, you will not exist after you die, and therefore this is it, and therefore get the most that you can out of this period. That just, it fits me like a glove, okay? Now, they rejected the immortal soul, as I explained. They look at existence as this finite period of time that you're conscious, and because of that, they say, well, what is the best life that you should lead? As this is the only existence we will have, and there is nothing other than this life, then our goal should be to maximize pleasure during this life. Okay? Now I'm going to get to what kind of pleasure they're talking about in just a little bit. Okay? But let's just posit it for the time being. Do you want to maximize pleasure during this life? You start thinking to yourself, and yeah, it's not merely maximizing pleasure, it's eliminating anxiety and fear from your life. And the Epicureans are of the belief that the fear of death is the principal fear. And I think that they're basically correct, that we are so afraid of death that we paralyze our lives for fear of this death because we don't know what happens. And we suspect, and we don't really want to face the fact that there's simply nothing. No different than when we were yet to be born. Before we were born, there was nothing. After we die, there will be nothing. But a lot of people refuse to face this, and because of it, they come up with all kinds of fictions about heaven and hell, or else they allow themselves to be paralyzed. They have these fictions of heaven and hell, and therefore they oblige themselves and others to act in certain ways so as to get into heaven, or push somebody else that they want to get into hell. See? They oblige themselves and others because of this notion of an afterlife. But if you let go of the notion of an afterlife, just ignore it. Just know that there is no afterlife, just as there was no pre-life. There was no existence before you were conceived. Well, if you truly accept this, then you will focus on your life and you will realize that what you should be doing is to maximize pleasure. Now, there are different forms of maximizing pleasure. There's the naive, or also known as folk hedonism. That's basically, hookers and cocaine. But there are a lot of other kinds. And the Epicureans were never talking about hookers and cocaine. They weren't saying, just go on a bender until you blow your brains out with all the cocaine and all the hookers. No, they didn't believe that at all. Okay. On the contrary, they were of the opinion that you have to have hedonism, pursue pleasure in your life in such a way that it does not diminish the time that you have available in your life. And that if you have to make sacrifices today to have more pleasure in the future, or not merely pleasure, but also a lack of anxiety into the future, then you should do so. Like, for instance, you have $100 today. You can go out and, have a good time. Or you can save those $100 for the time when you will be an old man and will not be able to earn a living and will need money to buy food in the future. You see? So they're not simply saying, live for today, live fast, die young, and leave a good-looking corpse. They're not saying that at all, okay? I'm going to get into the hedonism specifics of it in the next slide. But for now, I want you to understand that hedonism for the Epicureans was not hookers and blow. And it was not living for today and forgetting about tomorrow. Oh, no. It was always considering tomorrow. And they were always conscious also of the fact that there are different levels of pleasure. Levels of pleasure, that there are physical pleasures, there are pleasures of the senses, there are also pleasures of the mind. And that we should indulge in these different pleasures in a balanced manner, never overstepping one or the other. Because if you indulge in food, for instance, that's one of the great pleasures in life. But if you eat too much, you become a fat bastard and you drop dead of a heart attack way before your time. If you only indulge in pleasures of the mind, reading books or solving mathematical riddles or that kind of shit, there will come a moment when your body has decayed and you will no longer be able to continue because you haven't been taking care of your body. See? And if you only take care of your body and don't take care of your mind and absorb the other pleasures of the senses, then you're going to be an idiot. You're not going to be smart enough to take advantage of the things that you have. See? And all in balance. That's what they're basically saying. Now, free will in the Epicurean system is very, very important because, you see, they are non-deterministic. What is determinism? Determinism is the notion in philosophy that, see, someone's life is determined by circumstances, in the sense that basically everything is predestined, that everything is mechanistic, everything is moving forward in a way, and that our consciousness is just really along for the ride. And we think we have free will, but we really don't. What's really going on is that things are happening mechanistically, like in a clockwork. You look at a clockwork and all the gears are changing because they're all interconnected. And because they're all interconnected, there is no chance whatsoever of anything random happening or any agency. None of the gears can decide to do something different. No, they're all locked in. That's determinism. But they are anti-determinism because they think of the notion of the fortuna governans, that is the guiding chance. Because their notion of science and the fact that there's matter and void, and the notion that there are atoms, and the atoms move even when they are connected to one another and held together, and held together in the shape of a tree or the shape of a house. The atoms are moving, and there's matter and there's void. And so because of it, this creates the space for movement, random movement, i.e. chaos, okay? I mean, basically, fortuna gubernans, which is a key concept in Epicureanism, the notion of guiding chance, that things happen at random. Well, this is essentially chaos theory. And a lot of our contemporary science is proving that chaos theory is a real thing. It's a real thing, and it's in chaos because of atomism and fortuna gubernans that we have agency and free will. What we do affects reality, and it's because of our decisions. Our universe is not deterministic. It's not a clockwork. There is an element of chaos, and that's why we have free will. Our consciousness is not just simply along for the ride, watching as the gears turn. We can decide what to do. And that's a key notion, because they are basically saying that we are free individually. We are free people. And we as individuals can decide to do what we think is best for us. We are not slaves to our circumstances. We are not gears in a machine. And this is a powerful notion, because it's basically saying you are free. You really are. And they give proof of this. That's the whole point of it. In a way, I would argue that it's a hell of a lot more elegant than a lot of contemporary philosophers have discussed. Now, I skipped the part which let me go back to it really quick, about the hedonism of Epicureans. The hedonism of Epicureans, if you look at it, it's virtually identical to utilitarianism. Now, utilitarianism is very important because it is essentially the guiding philosophical principle of our contemporary Western civilization. Utilitarianism, it's the bedrock of our Western philosophy. It's act in such ways as to maximize utility. In this case, in the case of utilitarianism, utility is the well-being and happiness, i.e. pleasure, okay? Utilitarianism, as defined by Jeremy Bentham and perfected by John Mill and John Stuart Mill, it's essentially Epicureanism insofar as hedonism is concerned. But they call it utility. But it's essentially the same thing, well-being and pleasure. The difference perhaps would be that utilitarians view the well-being and pleasure of all the people at the same time, and that individuals should act not merely for their own well-being and happiness, but for the well-being and happiness of the entire group. Whereas Epicureans look at the well-being and happiness of the individual. Because it seems to me that in a way, utilitarians don't really believe in free will. They believe in group will in a way, but not free will, not individual free will. That's for another conversation. That's not really important for this discussion. But you have to understand that Epicureans essentially anticipated utilitarianism. And utilitarianism is how we act now. Because everybody's saying, act in a way that it doesn't bother anybody, and that it's useful and creates well-being and happiness. Well, that's Epicureanism in a way, the hedonism of Epicureanism. Okay, so anyway, the epistemology of Epicurus is something that also appeals to me very much. Because the Epicurean epistemology, if you don't know, it's a theory of knowledge. It's how you understand the world around you, okay? Now, the Epicureans had like a whole system that's kind of complex, and it's not really important that you know about it. But the basic point was that, see, all sense perception is true. That's what they believed. And that the errors that might arrive from our perception is really a misjudgment of those sense perceptions. Now, the judgments made from sense perceptions can be honed in and perfected and refined by further sense perception. That is, by looking at something and examining. We see it once and we think one thing. We have a certain judgment about it. And therefore, we have to put more sense perception on that particular object and study it more with more of our attention and the other senses at our disposal, be it the natural senses that we possess, sight, hearing, whatnot, touch, or the senses that we have acquired by way of technologies, like measuring tools and whatnot. Now, the more you look at something, at some initial judgment, more sense perception you apply to the thing, you will get a better sense of what it is. You can even get to a point where you start to nullify the original sense perception on discovering that's an error. Because that's the point of Epicureanism. See, that you sense something, you perceive something, and then you start putting, and you have a certain judgment about it. And so you start putting more sense perception on it, on that thing, and adding to your original judgment. And it could be that those additions ultimately nullify that original judgment. An example, suppose you're on a rowboat and one of the rows is in the water, right? One of the paddles, rather. And you look at it, and because of the water, because it refracts light, it looks like the paddle is bent. And you look at the paddle in the water and you say, holy shit, it's bent. That's your initial judgment. And then you take the paddle and you pull it out of the water and you see it in the air and it's not bent. And then you take it and you twist it in your hands and you see that it's not bent at all. And you put it back in the water and you say, oh, the water is doing something that gives me the illusion that it's bent, but it's not bent. And so you see, you had an initial judgment. The ore is bent. You took out the ore from the water, started examining it, and realized it's not bent because you applied more sense perception, and that nullified the original judgment. And then by applying more sense perception, you ensure that, in fact, the ore is straight. You put it back in the water, and on doing that, you observe with your sense perception that it appears that it bends, that the ore is bent, but it's not because you've applied other sense perception to it. So you come to the conclusion that what was going on was the water has a certain characteristic that gives the illusion that the ore is bent even when it is not. Now, this kind of pragmatic epistemology, this epistemology of basically saying, I accept the world around me, and if there's something that is not correct, I just simply have to apply more sense perception until I suss out the truth of the situation. This is an extremely pragmatic epistemology that I find extremely appealing because it's something that, in my experience, is the case. A lot of times I see something and I have one judgment, and then I just examine it more carefully with other senses and other tools at my disposal, and I come to a better appreciation as to what's going on. But you see, so many other philosophies don't look at things like that at all. In fact, some philosophies basically say outright that it's impossible for you to know the world, that your senses are always lying to you, that everything that you see is just an illusion and whatnot, which is, obviously not true. Because see, I see a truck coming my way, yeah? And I see it's coming. What, it's an illusion? Well, the illusion is going to kill me if I stand where I stand. I better get out of the fucking way, right? But see, a lot of philosophies basically argue this, that everything that you perceive, it's an illusion, it's incorrect. And of course, they make these moves in order to deny objective reality. Epicureanism says, no, there is objective reality. And you might not be appreciating it. And your sense perceptions might be in error, or more correctly, from their point of view, from the Epicureans' point of view, your judgment of those sense perceptions might be in error. But it doesn't change the objective fact. And again, this appeals to me very much because I believe in objective reality. I believe that, this little doodad, which is too complicated to explain what the fuck it is, but just take my word for it. This little doodad, it's real, okay? It's a real piece of metal, if I bang my head with it, it's gonna bash my skull in, okay? Because it's kind of heavy, right? It's real. It's objectively there. And I don't understand this notion of denying objective reality. But of course, I do understand, because the whole point, the whole notion of denying objective reality is so as to convince people of a particular ideology. But if you deny subjective reality and insist that reality is objective and that we might not be appreciating it in its totality, or we might not be appreciating it correctly, as the Epicureans would argue, but doesn't mean that the objective reality isn't there. See, once you posit that there is objective reality, then there's only one solution to whatever problem has arisen. You see, it's like a math problem. See, if the math problem is vague, there are any number of possible solutions. But if the math problem is crystal clear, there's only one solution or one set of solutions to the math problem. You see what I mean? And those who want to deny objective reality want it to be gray, want to be able to fudge the answer to get their way. That's what's going on. And Epicureanism denies this because they insist on objective reality. And any error, any difference of opinion, any relative truth, quote unquote, is really an issue to them of not having put enough sense perception onto the particular issue that is being observed. And that when there are enough points of view from the different sense perceptions of not only the individual participants, but of the other participants as well, then there's only one solution, an objective reality. See, they believe that, and so do I. Now, here on the morality issue, here we come to a little bit of a problem, okay? Epicureans basically believe in egotistic hedonism insofar as their morality is concerned, and that is only that which gives pleasure is valuable, i.e. moral. Now, of course, it's easy to object to that. It's incredibly easy to object to that, but that's basically the position that they have. They have the opinion that, see, only that which gives pleasure is moral, and that which does not give pleasure is immoral. So suppose, for the sake of argument, that, see, I committed a crime, a serious crime, that would land me in jail. And I say to myself, Jesus Christ, you know, there's this one witness who saw me commit this crime. I stole $1 billion, okay? I stole $1 billion, and this person, Joe, he saw me. And because of Joe's testimony, I'm going to go to jail. I'm going to have a shit life. It's going to be filled with not pleasure, of unhappiness, lack of pleasure, because I'm going to be in jail for the rest of my life for stealing this $1 billion. So what do? Epicureanism would say, well, kill Joe. Yeah, you know, I mean, fuck Joe. You know, you want to avoid pain and anxiety. So if you kill Joe, you won't go to jail. You'll continue to feel pleasure. And that, of course, we automatically agree that that would be immoral, right? I'm actually writing a book on ethics right now, and I have some issues on this particular problem, but I'm not going to bore you with it now, okay? But the point, Epicureanism does fall on the issue of morality because it basically says that doing something immoral in order to save yourself from pain and misery, or doing something that would harm somebody else, is acceptable, okay? And here's the thing, though. See, the case of me stealing $1 billion and deciding that I'm going to kill Joe so that he doesn't testify against me and I don't go to jail, that's pretty extreme. But there are a lot of other cases where you're basically, well, you know, I'm fucking over these people, but I'm going to have a happy life. And we do it all the time. And that's a problem with Epicureanism in the sense that perhaps we could argue, I would argue, that they are, that Epicureanism is actually describing how we behave morally a lot of times. A lot of times we don't kill Joe, but we fuck him over in order for us to be happy. And we do it all the time. And so perhaps that's another problem with Epicureanism, not because of Epicureanism, but rather because it reveals something about ourselves. That Epicureanism is on track to show that we act in ways that are kind of despicable and that we know are despicable, but which maximizes our pleasure, that maximizes our happiness. See? And this issue of the morality of Epicureanism is a big reason, for instance, that utilitarianism developed as it did to avoid precisely this problem, even though utilitarianism, prima facie, looks so similar to Epicureanism. See? Because Epicureanism does tell you, essentially, yeah, go ahead, kill Joe. If it'll save you 20 years in the slammer, why not? See? It doesn't give any real moral guidance as to why this would be bad, is the point I'm trying to make. Okay? Now, moving on, we got to talk about hedonism. And this, hedonism is a central part of Epicureanism. And the thing is, see, there are different kinds of hedonism. And you got to understand that. There are different kinds of hedonism. And in fact, in contemporary philosophy, Jesus Christ, you start looking into the subject, and there are a myriad different kinds, and they go on and on about different definitions of it and stuff like that. It's basically a philosophical wool gathering, as I say here in the outline. It's basically people just going on and on and on about this fucking shit, about dividing the different kinds of hedonism. I mean, slicing it as thin as bologna, you know what I mean? But the basic forms of hedonism, I would argue, are basically naive or folk hedonism, narrow hedonism, and preference hedonism, okay? And let me explain them. Naive hedonism or folk hedonism is a hookers and blow hedonism of just living for today and feeling as much immediate pleasure as possible in every given moment, okay? And this, of course, leads to leads to your death, quite frankly, because you can't experience that much pleasure without destroying yourself. Mm-hmm. I mean, you snort cocaine and you feel really good snorting the cocaine, but you keep on snorting cocaine until you OD and die. See, that's basically what happens, of course. And of course, we don't want that. So naive hedonism, well, that's something that the Epicureans themselves discounted. They didn't call it naive hedonism. They described it, but then they didn't put a particular label to it. But they described it to make it clear that this is not what they were referring to when they were referring to pursuing pleasure. They were thinking of something more along the lines of narrow hedonism, which is pleasure achieved over time that minimizes pain or discomfort. Okay, and that's like the typical thing. Like, for instance. One of the things I'm enjoying doing very much is playing squash, 3-4 times a week, right? I play in the mornings and I feel great. I play squash. I feel physically great when I'm doing it and after. And it doesn't hurt me particularly. Well, it kind of hurts my ankle, but that's neither here nor there. But because of my broken ankle, that thing that happened to me in September. But other than that, I feel great physically. I feel fit. It just makes me feel very good. Okay. And it makes me feel very good over time. Now, if I really, really practiced, okay, it would increase my pain and discomfort to be like practicing like crazy, okay? And that would be a hedonism. That would be something that Epicureans would not say that I should do. They would say, no, don't practice so hard at squash. Play, like 3 hours, maybe 4 hours a week. Don't play 20, 30 hours a week. Why are you suffering for the sake of your squash game? You see, that's what they would be saying, which makes sense. And see, the problem, of course, is that Epicureans, if I were to say to the Epicureans, well, my goal is to practice and suffer so that I can get really good, so good that I win a championship at squash, right? That's why I want to practice 20, 30 hours a week. They wouldn't have a response for that. Or let me rephrase it. The way that the Epicureans in the classic texts of Epicurus himself and Lucretius stated, they never defined the hedonism so carefully. It was vague enough that the pursuit of pleasure could be more or less whatever you considered pleasure. It's only in contemporary philosophy that in the last, 100 years or so, that people have sort of like refined what exactly you mean by hedonism. I mean, they really want to get down to the nitty-gritty to understand exactly what you mean. The Epicureans, they discounted naive or folk hedonism, the hedonism of just, living fast and dying young. They discounted that for obvious reasons, but they didn't give a good explanation as to, for instance, why you would sacrifice and feel pain in order to get good at something. They didn't explain that, but contemporary philosophy does. And so if you add contemporary notions of hedonism to the Epicurean ideas, which is basically what I've done. I've done it without consciously thinking about it. It's sort of like catch as catch can kind of thing, improvising my way to the solution. But as I've improvised my way to the solution, now I understand it better, and that's why I'm presenting it to you. Because you see, narrow hedonism of just doing that which gives you pleasure, okay, that gives you pleasure over time while minimizing pain and discomfort. Well, it's pretty easy to find a very strong critique against it. And the critique against it is Robert Nozick's experience machine. Now, Robert Nozick's experience machine objection came up in, I think, in 71 or something like that. And basically, Nozick, who's a big-time philosopher, but it's not important what he was thinking about. It's just important his objection to narrow hedonism, because the previous one, naive or folk hedonism, everybody discounts it for the obvious reason that, you don't want to live fast and die young at 27, right? So, but Nozick's objection to narrow hedonism was the experience machine. And the experience machine was very simple. It's this machine, and you guys who know a little bit about movies will recognize this right away, and you'll realize when I explain it to you that this is where the idea came from for this famous movie. You see, the experience machine, Robert Nozick had this notion that there's this machine that you can plug your brain into, and it makes you feel pleasure all the time. It's a fantasy, okay? It's just electrodes in your brain making you feel that you have done certain things that are pleasurable, that you've done the exercise, that you've eaten the pizza pie and what have you. But you really haven't. It's just an illusion. But subjectively, it feels like it's so. So the obvious question, would you want to be plugged into the experience machine, or would you want to actually live a life and work out playing squash and eat a pizza pie? The vast majority of people would say, no, I do not want to be plugged in. I want to experience the real thing, okay? Of course, this is the basic plot of the Matrix movies, right? And a bunch of other movies. But the experience machine objection is very valid to narrow hedonism, because in narrow hedonism, it would be logical for you to plug yourself in. So there must be something going on that's beyond pleasure. Because see, if what you want is pleasure, then why are you objecting to a machine that makes you feel pleasure all the time? There must be something more that you desire. Not merely pleasure, but something else. And Nozick, see, all he has to prove is that there's something beyond pleasure that you desire. That pleasure in and of itself, or the minimization of pain and discomfort, however you want to call it, or the lack of anxiety and the lack of fear, what have you, all of this, we can just call it one big ball of, pleasure, right? If you don't want to plug in to the experience machine and you adamantly refuse, then there's something beyond pleasure that you want from life. And it's a very valid point. It's a very valid objection. So Robert Parfit, who was another philosopher, I think Nozick and Parfit were born the same year, 1938, and they both died, by the way. They died in I think in 2006 and 2017 or something like that. Anyway, Robert Parfit came up with the notion of preference hedonism, and this is probably a more accurate sense of hedonism as I believe it to be. Okay, because see, Parfit defined pleasure as successfully achieving your preferences over time. Now listen, let me rephrase that. See, narrow hedonism is achieving pleasure over time. that is feeling good, okay? Subjectively, minimizing pain, minimizing discomfort over time, however long time you think you're going to have, okay? That's narrow hedonism. But preference hedonism is getting the things that you want over time. And think about the difference of that, see? Because achieving the things that you want, yeah, you're going to achieve them and you'll feel pleasure when you achieve them. But in the getting that thing, there are going to be periods of times when you're not feeling pleasure at all. You're going to be feeling the opposite of pleasure. You're going to feel enormous discomfort. Suppose, again, I want to be a champion squash player. And so I have to work out 20 hours a week. Am I going to feel pleasure during those 20, 30 hours a week? No, I will not. My muscles will ache, my joints will ache, I'll be tired, out of breath, and all the rest of it. I'll be hungry, I'll be thirsty, I'll experience a lot of discomfort. Would I do it? Of course I would, because I want to be champion. And so the notion of preference hedonism, that is achieving those things that you prefer over time, those things that you want, that's the real hedonism that we're talking about, right? And as you can see, of course, preference hedonism defeats Nozick's experience machine objection. Because if you want to achieve something and you're willing to feel pain about it, right, then the experience machine objection doesn't work. Because, see, there is something beyond pleasure, and you're willing to experience pain and discomfort in order to achieve that thing. Okay? The issue, I think, might be that the very term preference hedonism might be a misnomer, because that's what it's called in contemporary philosophy, but it's basically using the word hedonism, but really pointing in a different direction. Because preference hedonism, you are no longer feeling pleasure. You're achieving your preferences and thereby achieving pleasure. But the road to that pleasure, yeah, it's a rocky road. And very likely, see, when you achieve that thing, you won't feel the pleasure that you thought you would. In fact, in my own experience, it's been the case that most of the times when I finally achieved the things that I thought I really, really wanted, when I finally got them, it was like, that's nice enough. What next? See? So it's a little complicated, this area of hedonism. Okay? It's a little complicated. When you start thinking about it, it gets pretty tough. Okay? But anyway, this is an overview of Epicureanism, and I wanted you to see this presentation because it's essentially what I believe. And I think that the key insights, the key issues, is the lack of a fear of death and the consciousness that this life is all we have. I think those are the two most important things that you should take away from this presentation of Epicureanism. See? I think it's the most important insights of Epicureanism. Because the other philosophies, Stoic philosophies and whatnot, they had notions that there's something after death. But Epicureanism discounts that. And they give a very, very powerful argument as to why that is not the case, that this is it. The symmetry argument, the notion that there was no existence before you were conceived, and thus there will be no existence after you die. And your spirit, your soul, your essence, whatsoever you want to call it, it will dissipate and or vanish with your physical death. It might remain in the memory of people, but as something present, it will be gone once your body is dead. Yeah, that's true. And it's not something that I believe. I think that this is basically the right answer. This is it. And therefore, once you think along these lines, it makes you hone in on your conscious life and realize that you do not have a moment to waste. Because every moment that you waste is a moment that you cannot get back, because this is all you'll ever have in your life. And And I think that that's why I value Epicureanism, and I'm becoming more and more convinced that you should become an Epicurean and study Epicureanism so that you get not that fear of death, but that fear of mismanaged life. Because one of the things that I realize is that there are so many people who follow me on my various channels and here on Patreon who are older guys who confess or signal or tell me that they have mismanaged their lives. They're in their late 40s, their 50s, or their 60s, and they didn't do the things that they should have done because they weren't focused on it. They didn't realize that this was it, that the conscious life that they were living, that's it. And there's no more. They weren't thinking that. They had a confusion about what came after their life. And maybe because of their upbringing, maybe they were raised Christian with the notion of heaven and hell or whatnot, or some other religion that had some sort of sense of an afterlife of whatever sort. But because of it, they weren't paying that close attention to the actual life they were living. And I've noticed something else too. The religions where there is a clear sense that there's nothing after this life, I'm thinking specifically of Judaism. Jews tend to lead richer lives. And I suspect it's because since their religion does not give them the comfort of an afterlife, the religion, Judaism, explicitly says that, this is it. You're going to die and that's that. And there isn't going to be a heaven or hell or anything. It's over. I think that notion sparks in Jews a notion that they should live their life more fully. And I think that you look at other religions that have a notion of an afterlife, and the richer that notion of an afterlife, the more fantastical it is, with angels and demons and paradise and rivers of milk and honey and 72 virgins and shit like that. The more of this fantastic, this fantasy they have, the greater the fantasy, the more they mismanage their lives, the more they are willing to essentially throw their lives away in humdrum ways, in a humdrum manner, doing nothing of any importance or nothing of any satisfaction. They clip off their days being a truck driver or a short order cook or whatever the fuck. And they comfort themselves with these illusions that, oh yeah, my life is kind of miserable and I'm not doing anything, but in the afterlife, it'll be great. They might not be saying it explicitly, but they're sort of like tacitly believing that. Or worse yet, not even thinking about it, but just have a vague notion. And so they don't do anything now in this life. They don't value this life. And Epicureanism, as I've discovered it, because I actually studied this shit decades ago in college, but I just studied it, for the test, and I didn't really pay attention. I didn't think about it. Now I am thinking about it. And the more I think about it, the more I realize how valuable this philosophy is, because it focuses your attention. And it doesn't commit the mistake of Stoicism, which basically says, accept the misery. Epicureanism is not down with you accepting the misery. Epicureanism is basically saying, fight the misery. Don't allow the misery to dominate your life. And that is so much healthier, so much better, because you're not lying down, you're standing up for yourself. You see? I urge you to read Lucretius, on the nature of things. I urge you to look more into it. Just fucking read Wikipedia, okay? I mean, do keep in mind, a lot of people, a lot of philosophy professors and whatnot, they want to give you the notion that all this shit is really difficult and complicated. It's not, okay? Especially Greek philosophers. Saying Greek philosophers, when they wrote their philosophy books and whatnot, they wanted people to convert to their ideas. And so they wrote the shit pretty straightforward. They didn't use technical language or anything of the sort. Contemporary academic philosophers, they use all kinds of technical language because a lot of it is sort of like these barriers of entry, so that they can divine, those people who are just plebes and those who are future academics or are academics, right? But Lucretius, he wrote this poem and it's an entertainment. It's supposed to be entertaining. And by entertainment, it teaches you Epicureanism, Epicurean philosophy. So read it and look into it. Read it in Wikipedia. Find out as much as you can about it. And focus on that notion that there is nothing after your death. And therefore, there is no reason to fear it. Because, I mean, going back to the symmetry argument, you do not fear the fact that before you were conceived, you didn't exist. Now, do you? You don't think, oh, how horrible it was that I didn't exist. You don't think about that at all. You know for a fact that you didn't exist before you were born, and you just accept it. And by the same token, you should accept the fact that there will come a time when you no longer exist. And will there be pain? No. Because before you were born, there was no pain either. There was no pain, there was no boredom, there was no misery, there was no fear, there was nothing. When you accept this and you focus on the life that you're living, and thus focus on the fact of its short duration, then you start really to enjoy it. Okay, I've been jawboning long enough. Let's get some people in. Well, first of all, I got to see if you guys all heard me, because see, I couldn't see the monitor, and I'm just going to ask you all, hit me with a +1 if you guys heard all of it and there was no interruption in the audio. So you poor bastards heard all of my rantings and ravings about Epicureanism, huh? Good to know. Yeah, you poor bastards. You can take a shot now. Take a drink. Whatever it is that you're drinking, have some. Do I have any drinks here? Actually, let me check real quick. Because I could use some Jägermeister. Oh, I have Irish whiskey and I have some brandy. Do I want to? What the fuck? I'll take a shot. And yeah, since I don't have any clean glasses here, I'm gonna take it just a straight shot, straight from the bottle. Yeah. Here, you guys see it? Oh, it's just a cheapy EXO. Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, not the best brandy I've ever had, but beggars can't be choosers, I suppose. So anyway, let's have some questions. Painfully clear. Oof, that doesn't sound. Put you on, please. Sure. Let me find Sarab. I can't put you on, Sarab. You're on a cell phone. Yeah. Let me just check to make sure. Sarab. Yeah, you're on a cell phone. I can't take people on a cell phone. It's not me. It's the system. It doesn't allow it. Yes, I'm a party animal. Deadpool. Let me bring in Deadpool. He's got like a big question. It's too long for me to read, so I'll just bring him on. Deadpool, I just allowed your webcam and microphone. While we wait for you to process, I'll read the question. Hi, Coach. I have a question. One, it's multiple questions. How do you learn a language quickly? What languages should we learn? Can we learn more than one language at the same time? I don't know about that. I don't know which language would be the best to learn. Question number 2, how do you read a book or listen to a podcast or audiobook quickly? How do you decide which is important or not in a book or audiobook or podcast?
Hey, Coach, can you hear me, Coach?
Yes, I can hear you, Deadpool. How's it going?
Hi, going, man. How's it going, man?
Pretty good, pretty good. What's up?
How's it going? Good. It's an honor to talk to you, man. It's God, man. I want to get your autograph right now. It's like, wow. And it's like,
well, thank you very much, and cheers to you. So
yeah,
so tell me, what's this thing about languages and books and shit?
I guess I only speak English, but I only speak English, and I just want to learn a language.
Learn Spanish. Spanish is the language. You live in the United States, I take it.
No, I don't live in. I live in Mexico as a
Oh,
expat.
you don't. Oh, you don't
I
know
just came.
Spanish?
I know I have not learned Spanish, so I just came here for vacation and just just escape my own home country
Okay,
and
what's your home
Mexico,
country?
in Canada, sir.
Okay. Yeah, Canada is a shithole. Yeah, it's
I know
going
it
down the
is.
tubes. Yeah. Well, then find learn Spanish. That's the quick and easy answer. You're in Mexico, learn Spanish. And
Uh,
Spanish is great because you can go anywhere in Central and South America and a lot of places in North America and speak to people, speak to anybody there. So yeah, definitely. That's a very useful language to know.
so
And your second question was
when you
about
learn,
books and shit.
uh, sorry,
Yeah.
coach, when you learn a language, you have to learn the grammar, the structure you recommend, like the grammar, the structure, the speaking. And can you learn two languages at the same time? Do you recommend just
I
one?
don't think so. I don't think you can. Not realistically. Okay. I mean, learning one language is a full time thing. Learning two languages at the same time, that seems like needlessly complicated. You know what I mean? Focus on one. I mean, one at a time. Yeah. So anyway, what about books?
Yeah,
What's your
sorry,
issue
but
there?
I have a question about sorry about the language. But let's say I focus on one language. How long do I spend in Spanish before I can move on to the next language? Do you have any recommendation?
I have no idea, man. I mean, I really, and this is sort of like really off topic. So let's get to the book issue.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure, no problem, sir.
Sure.
Uh, yeah, sorry about that. The book
That's okay.
issue.
That's okay.
The book issue. The book. How do you know when you read a book? How do you know it's when you read a book, what is important? Because when I read a book, I don't remember what I read, and I can't tell which is important. It takes too much time. I learn best through like listening to audios and listening to
Yeah,
audios.
that happens. And so if that's the case, then consume more audiobooks as opposed to print books. Simple as that. Um, you know, See, there is no one way to learn information. Yeah, you have to pick up information the way that's most convenient for you. And if using audiobooks is better than print books, then use that. There's no problem. It's not like there's no like police saying like, ooh, you can't learn by audiobooks, only by print. No, there's nothing going on like that on the one hand. On the other hand, you discover what's important by learning more and more information. And quickly you'll start to realize what's important and what's not. It's just a natural effect of the more content you take in,
Okay.
the easier it will become for you to figure out what's important and what's not. Yeah.
Okay, because for example, I was listening to the audiobook of Anti-Fragile by Nicholas Taleb, and the only thing I understood I actually didn't understood it really well. It was like it was too complicated. But when I listen to say your webinars, or you just make it simple and I can pick up information. But with something like say Nick, I'm just Anti-Fragile. It's just too hard to understand. It's too like academic, but a lot of
Well, yeah.
and
When that happens, then go to some simpler source to get the same information. I'm a huge fan of Wikipedia precisely for that reason, because it shows you information and it breaks it down for you in a very simple way. You could probably read the entry in Wikipedia for Anti-Fragile and get all the essence of the book without having to really read the book, and it's going to be fairly accurate or accurate enough. And so, yeah, do that. Don't look, getting information and stuff should not be some sort of torture session. Okay, you want information so that it can be useful to you, information and insights that are useful to you, and so get them in the easiest way possible. Yeah. So
okay.
Deadpool, anything else? Any other question on your mind?
I guess I don't know how many minutes because I want to respect other people's time, but
Yeah, go ahead.
other
Make it quick.
is how to kill the nice guy, like the nice guy. You see, I noticed that in my experience, the nice guy, people take advantage of you. I've had a lot of experiences, and I want to kill this guy, this nice guy in me. Like I have this devil and an angel, and this angel is kind of ruining my life, and I kind of want to be that my angel. I don't know how do you say that. Like there's a good
Okay, well, it's very simple. It's very simple. Figure out what's important to you, what your objectives, what are your objectives, what are your priorities, and disregard the priorities of other people in order to get your priorities. Simple as that. See, nice guys, they are putting aside their own priorities and their own preferences in order to make it easier for other people to achieve their priorities, their preferences. That's what's going on. A nice guy just doesn't want to be a bother to other people. Be the bother. Okay? Simple as that. You know, you have a certain priority, you have a certain thing that you want, then go for it and ignore what other people want. Okay? I mean, it's not like killing them, okay? I mean, people might want to live, and so of course, you know, you don't want to shoot them or something like that. I'm not advocating for something extreme, but I'm saying that, see, okay, like this, you're driving in your car and there's a parking spot, and you arrive and you see that somebody's coming up to that parking spot. Do you stop and let the other guy into that parking slot? No, you just go into it yourself because you want that parking spot. You just have to decide that what you want is more important than what other people want. And what happens is a lot of times nice guys have been raised to believe that other people's convenience, other people's preferences are more important than their own. They don't have the self-confidence to think to themselves, what I want is the most important thing for me, and I'm going to do everything in my power to achieve what I want. See, that's what's going on with a nice guy. And you got to, I mean, what is not going on with a nice guy? They are not doing that. They are not pursuing their goals, their preferences. And that's what you have to do. It's not complicated, but it takes nerve. And especially you have to get over a lot of your socialization and conditioning from your parents or your teachers or your environment that has led you to believe that you should be passive and let other people get their way while you wait. You got to get over that. See?
Okay. Because I feel guilty, and sometimes I hit myself for being like this nice guy, and I hit myself all the time.
Then don't. Then when you feel that you're being a nice guy, drown that feeling and just go for what you want. Simple as that.
So
okay,
it's okay
Deadpool.
to be selfish. It's okay.
Yes, of course it is. It's necessary if you want to achieve anything in life. You got to be selfish. Read The Fountainhead and Anthem, the Ayn Rand books. Then get back to me. The Fountainhead.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for your time. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
No problem. But that book will teach you to not be a nice guy anymore. Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, take it easy.
Bye,
no problem. Take it easy, Deadpool. Let me see. Andre B has a question that, well, let me get questions about this Epicureanism, because there are a lot of other things that, well, this is interesting. John says he has a question, but I'm going to bring him on. John, where did John go? John is gone. Oh, shit. John had a question, and his question was, religion is a form of exploitation? No. Well, yes, it's complicated. Religion is a mechanism of social control, but it also achieves this social control by giving people certain illusions that comfort them. Now, why does a religion want to be a mechanism of social control? Well, because we need social control. We need people to act in ways that are not counterproductive to the wider group. Okay? We can't have infighting in a society. I mean, we can have infighting that is moderate. You know, people have different opinions about what we should do in this or that situation. But we can't have like full-on fighting war. We can't have civil war, because then our society just collapses. So religion serves a very useful purpose of creating social cohesion, where we're all swimming in the same direction. We all have the same priorities, and they are the priorities that the religion gave us. Now, that is a social conditioning that religion gives us. And they give it to us by way of carrot and stick, giving certain promises as to what will happen in the afterlife, and certain punishments that will happen either in the afterlife or in this life if we don't do as the religion says we should, if we act in sinful ways, for instance. Okay? If we act in sinful ways, we'll, go to hell. And if we act in really sinful ways, well, the church fathers might kill us, might drown us, might, draw and quarter us, or whatever the fuck. See what I'm saying? And so it's carrot and stick. And this creates social cohesion. Religions are necessary. And a lot of times people don't realize that certain ideologies, certain belief systems are religions. They just don't have a God. Okay? Like the woke ideology, that's a religion. It's a religion, simple as that, designed to give social cohesion. It's absurd, it's self-contradictory, just like every other religion. It has this notion that there are people who are saved and people who are damned. Yeah, it's a religion, simple as that. Of course, it doesn't have a God. It doesn't have a formal priestly caste, although that's starting to emerge. But you see my point. There are lots of ideologies that are like religion. The Soviet Union had the Communist Party, and that was kind of like a religion. Okay, and Soviet, Communist Party members in the Soviet Union were sort of like the priestly caste. I mean, if you think about it, the whole notion of Leninism is basically the establishment of a secular priestly caste, and it was the Communist Party. See, so yeah, it's a form of exploitation, but that's like naive because it does a lot of useful things at the same time. Okay, it creates social peace, and once a society is peaceful internally, it can create and build a lot of things. And once it's peaceful and it's stable, it can create the mechanisms, the pathways for individual happiness within that society. Okay, and this is very important. Let me go back here and chat to. I'm looking for questions about. Let's go to Anthony. Anthony has a question here that I want to bring him in because he asked a very legitimate question. I'll read Anthony's question while we wait for him to get on. Anthony says, does preference hedonism disregard the amount of pain, cost, and sacrifice needed to achieve or end result goal? Basically, yes. Yeah. Because in preference hedonism, see, the hedonism arrives from achieving the things that you want, fulfilling your preferences, okay? And that the goal in your life should be to fulfill your preferences, whatsoever those preferences may be, no matter how humble or highfalutin those preferences might happen to be. Your preference might be that you want to be king of the world, or your preference might be that you want to have chocolate ice cream after dinner as your dessert, okay? I mean, you see how mundane one is and how grandiose the other is. If you achieve one and not the other, that's the notion of happiness and unhappiness, see? And so preference hedonism also gives you the notion that, see, all of your preferences, irrespective of how highfalutin or humble they might happen to be, they're equally important to you. And many times that is the case. You could have like a highfalutin desire, for instance, to be king of the world. And you might have a whole host of humble desires, such as to eat chocolate ice cream for dessert tonight, and to have a nice glass of cognac and cigar after your dessert. And you don't achieve being, king of the world, but you do achieve the chocolate ice cream and the cognac and the cigar. And so they are, in very real sense, almost of equal value, even though objectively one is far more humble than the other. But to you, the preferences have almost equal weight. You see? Hello, Anthony. You're finally there.
Yeah, am I on?
Yeah, you're on. How's it going?
Oh, wonderful! First time talking, so thank you very much. It's an honor
pleasure
to talk to you. Thank you for answering my question. That's kind of what I wanted to know. Like, do you if the end goal is something that takes a lot of sacrifice and pain, is it does preference hedonism mean that you do whatever is needed to achieve that?
Yes, exactly. It's like the whole saw of pain and gain. You have to suffer pain in order to gain muscle when you're working out at the gym. Well, if your preference is to get bulked up and have a lot of muscles, then you're willing to accept that pain. And in fact, people do it all the time. And that shows that preference hedonism is a better definition in many ways than just narrow hedonism. Narrow hedonism being that, feeling good over a length of time. Because narrow hedonism does not give you the opportunity to suffer pain in order to achieve some greater goal that is more valuable to you, that whereby the pain that you experience is relatively minor compared to the positives of the result. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So in the long run, is preference hedonism better than narrow hedonism in the long
Yeah.
run? Mm,
Yeah, I think so. I personally think so, yes. Okay. Because
okay.
because narrow hedonism, if you're operating narrow hedonism over the length of your expected life, suppose for the sake of argument that you're 20 years old and you expect to live until the age of 80, so that's 60 years. So what you want to do is live as painless life as possible, okay, and suffer as little pain as possible. So suppose you inherit a little cabin in the woods, and for circumstances there, you're in a cabin in the woods and there's easy food all around. You don't have to work very hard. So you'd say to yourself, well, I want to avoid all pain, and I've got this great little cabin and there's free food for the rest of my life. So I'm just going to hunker down here and live my life in my log cabin for the rest of my life and never move. That fulfills narrow hedonism, but I would suspect that most people would agree that that's a horrible way to live. I mean, you're 20 years old and you're going to lock yourself away for the next 60 years in a little cabin and never experience the world, never go anywhere, and just, live off fruits and berries or whatever the fuck and whatever random animal passes by. And that's how you're going to live your entire life. That seems crazy. But that's what narrow hedonism would lead you to think. Okay. But preference hedonism would say, no, what you want to do is figure out what your preferences are, define what they are, and then pursue them. And here's another thing about preference hedonism, because it forces you, it obliges you to figure out what you want. A lot of times, and I can speak from my own experience, a lot of times you don't stop and think and say, this is what I want. And that's so important, because a lot of times you want to be able to say, this is what I want, and this is what I want to avoid. You see? I mean, it's not enough to say that I want to avoid pain. A lot of times it's important to say, I want to achieve X. I want to, for instance, bulk up and have 20 pounds of muscle more than I have now, for instance, okay? But define it. Once you define things, many times it's easier to achieve them. And a lot of times when you do not define what you want, you sort of like amble along with no direction. You're just going here, going there, but you're all confused. But when you think that your happiness is based on preference hedonism, you force yourself to say, what are my preferences? It forces you to ask yourself, what are my preferences? What do I want? And that very question solves all your problems.
Do you analyze the risk involved in achieving that as well? Is that part
I
of the
beg your
equation?
pardon? Can you repeat?
Would you analyze the risk involved in achieving that as well? Is that part of the equation?
Well, I personally think that analyzing the risk of something is something you define after figuring out what it is that you want. I mean, first define the objective and then figure out if it's too risky or not. But to be concerned about risk before figuring out what you want, that's foolish. Okay. And also what happens is a lot of times, if you clearly define what you want, there might be an obvious risk, but then as you study it, because you have a clear sense of what it is that you want, you might discover that there is a risk-free or a less risky way to achieve that objective. You see what I'm saying? I mean, like, for instance, you're standing in San Francisco. You're standing on the tip of San Francisco, and you want to, no, that was a bad example. You want to do something. You want to, I don't know, travel from Los Angeles to New York, okay? And you say to yourself, well, how can I do it? I could do it by car. But then you say, well, I want to go to New York City from Los Angeles. And then you start exploring your options, and you're like, okay, I could go by car. I could go by foot. I could go by train. Oh, I could go by airplane. And you see? But you wouldn't have reached that conclusion that going by airplane would be the best if you hadn't clearly defined where you wanted to go first. You see? And this is a horrible example, but I'm just trying to emphasize the point. Figuring out what you want first is the most important thing. How you achieve it, that's secondary. It's figuring out what you want first. And once you figure out clearly what you want, a lot of times it could be that the first way to achieve that thing is very risky or impossible. But as you think about achieving that objective, thinking about it more leads you to realize that there are other avenues to achieve that goal. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you for your time, and coach, I appreciate it. That helps.
No problem. Anything else on your mind, man?
Not currently. I think that's it. I want to save time for my other everyone else on the chat.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Really appreciate
Have
it,
a good
Anthony.
day. You
You
too.
too. Okay. Jan says here, what if you have some disease that will kill you in a few years? Will hookers and blow be the Epicurean way? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, like, think about it. You're going to die in a week. Let's just say you got some disease and you're going to die in a week. Yeah, then get the hookers and blow. Sure. See? I mean, the negative effects of the hookers and blow will happen long after you're dead, i.e., you won't suffer them. See? It's like, if you're dying of some terrible disease, you're going to die in a week. Go ahead and rob a bank. What can happen to you? Yeah? You're going to die in a week, right? If you rob the bank successfully, you got the cash. Well, it's not that much time left. You're not going to suffer very long in prison because you're going to be dead in a week. You see? So that's the notion of narrow hedonism. You factor in the amount of time that you have. And if you, for a fact, know that you're going to die in a relatively short amount of time, then yeah, you can do things that are long-term damaging, but since there's not going to be a long-term because you're going to die soon, then sure, go ahead, take them. See? Let me see the other question. Philosophy is cope for atheists. Well, I tend to think that religion is cope for people who are unrealistic. Okay? I don't have a problem with religion. And if people want to believe in something, in some God or some religion, that's perfectly fine by me. I am not a militant atheist. I am not out to shit on religious believers. And I recognize that a lot of times religious believers have a much happier life than somebody who is an atheist or non-believer, because their belief gives them a sense of purpose, that even if the fact that God is a figment of the imagination, okay, and what they believe in is a fiction, therefore, but objectively, they feel more secure in their lives. So what's wrong with that? See? Yeah. J10 says, being able to let go of an idea is a great quality to have. Yes. It's one of the most important qualities. I would say that you always want to be able to let go of an idea. I've just decided, it's wrong. You always want to have that. I mean, you guys remember when the whole COVID-19 shit started, I was really panicked. I thought that this was going to be the end of the world. But as the weeks progressed and, people weren't dropping like flies in the street, on the contrary, I started to realize, I was totally wrong. And so now, of course, I think that the whole thing is just bullshit. I wish that the authorities had come to the same conclusion back in April, May of last year, because it was like, for me, I think it was May or June that I came to the conclusion that, it's no big deal. It's not the fuss that they're raising it to be. I wish that people had come to that conclusion before, but the point that I'm trying to make is that, in my own case, I never, ever fear changing an idea with new information. And if people think that that makes me look foolish, then they're the fools, because it's far worse to hold on to an incorrect idea when you know it's incorrect, because then you really are a fool. You're a fool because you can't break away from something that you said before. You're too embarrassed. And that's the greatest foolishness of them all. Oh, you guys want a PDF of the slides? Sure. Let me see how I can do this. I mean, I'm happy to do it. Hang on. Let me just turn this off. Stop sharing the screen. Yeah, and here I am. Give me just a moment. I'm going to share this thing. Oh shit, what the fuck did I do? No, I don't want that. No. Wait. Export. Here we are. Export. Put it on my desktop. Its file format is a PDF. Hang on. There we go. And what's this button? This button. Handout. Yes. Upload a file. And it's going up now. It's at 5%. It'll take a while to upload. Oh, there it goes. 25, 30, 40, 50, and 100%. And share now. There you go. Go to the handout section there. You should be able to download it. Yep. Shit, I should do that all the time. Okay. Guys, remind me. Next time I'll do it every time. You know, it wasn't okay. Well, while I'm at it, I might as well, because J10 is saying, why don't I do one on Rush? Sure. Hang on a second. Let me find the Rush one. Yeah. Export. Shit, you know, I should have done this. Before. My mistake, guys. So hang on. 28, the birthday webinar. And wait, let me just check to make sure. Yeah. There we are. Yeah, the whole fucking thing. Dude, I should have done this. I should have done this before. I'm so sorry, guys. And hang on a second. I'm going to put another handout. And this one is the Rush one. Yeah, it's taking its time. 3%, 4%, 5, 6. Oh, and there it goes. And 50%. And I'm not going to get drunk. Don't worry. There, I put up the Why Rush Matters one. Okay, so let's go back to the questions. How to determine if an idea is right or wrong? Well, very simple. See, does an idea predict the future? Predict what will happen? Suppose I have the following notion. Little Johnny is going to bring 2 eggs, and little Mary is going to go to the store and buy 4 eggs. So before they have arrived, I say 2 eggs from Johnny plus 4 eggs is going to be 6. And then they both arrive, both children arrive with all the eggs, and I count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The idea is correct. See? The idea that 2 plus 4 is 6 is correct, because when the kids show up with the 2 eggs and the 4 eggs, it adds up to 6 eggs. See? And this is obviously a very simple example, but the point remains. See, when you have a specific idea and that idea anticipates reality or conforms to reality, that's the correct idea. If an idea you come across conforms to reality better, explains reality better, then the idea is better than the old idea. Many times it's not so much that an idea is right or wrong, but rather that one idea or another conforms to reality better, describes reality better. Ultimately, that's what's going on. See, the ideas we have about the world, they are attempts to describe it and sometimes to anticipate what the world is going to do. Okay, that's the whole idea. Is it the right idea, the wrong idea? It's more accurate to say it's closer to reality idea or less close to reality idea. Not so much right or wrong. Because a lot of times an idea at one point was the correct idea, but then times changed, more information was accrued, and that idea became not so exact. Like, for instance, Newtonian physics. From the time of the 17th century that Isaac Newton came up with his ideas, that was physics, right? But then in the early 20th century, Einstein came up with relativity, and that was a better idea. You see? Now, do keep in mind that sometimes ideas are not so much about reality, but about what people prefer, which is different. Okay? Like, for instance, the whole notion that racism is bad. Well, that's not really accurate. That's just a preference. Racism, in and of itself, the act of stereotyping people based on their participation, rather based on their belonging to one racial group and another, and discriminating against it, that's just an action. Okay? That's an action of people. It's not describing reality. Okay? And to say that racism is a bad idea, well, why? Because it could be in some circumstances that discriminating against certain races or certain people because of inherent characteristics is actually a good thing. Okay? Racism or sexism. Okay? For instance, a very simple example of how sexism is good, or accurate at least, is, women have lower upper body strength. They don't have any upper body strength practically, certainly not compared to men, even weak men, right? Let alone a physically fit man. So the sexist rule is that we don't allow any women to be firemen. That's a sexist rule. And you say, well, that's sexism. We shouldn't have that rule. But then you start looking at it and you say to yourself, well, yeah, we should not have any women because women don't have upper body strength compared to a fit man. And upper body strength is very important to a fireman because he has to carry heavy equipment and potentially carry a person who is injured in a fire. And therefore, somebody who has a great deal of upper body strength is more physically fit for the job of being a fireman. And since all women have substantially less upper body strength than most men, let alone the men who would qualify to be firemen, women shouldn't be even considered for a post of fireman. Now you say, well, that's sexist. Yes, but it's accurate for the requirements, you see? And so what happens is a lot of times what we think is a bad idea is just an idea that we find distasteful. But it could very well be the right idea, the correct idea, that conforms to reality better than what we want reality to be like. Because especially in our contemporary culture, what happens is that we want reality to be closer to our own preferences. We want to bend reality or distort it or pretend that reality isn't the way it actually is, because we have our preferences, and our preferences are so strong that we are in fact willing to essentially fool ourselves and fool everybody else so that we have certain illusions, so that we maintain our preferences. And this is, of course, a mistake. Because, see, I can have a preference that the highway is empty so that I can cross it, and I can just fool myself and fool everybody and say, no, there's nobody on the road, there's nobody on the road, and I cross it convinced that there was nobody on the road, and then the truck hits me and kills me. You see? I mean, that's what's going on. And reality will eventually kill you. And that's why you should never fool yourself, because it's only a matter of time before it kills you. See, you can fudge reality in very specific circumstances, in circumstances where it doesn't really matter. For instance, when you tell a small child that the fairy godmother is going to come and take their tooth away and leave a nickel for them or whatever. Yeah, they're sure. You're totally fudging reality, but it's a trivial set of circumstances. You're telling a whopper of a lie to a small child, but it will have no consequences to anybody, not even to the child, because the child will grow up and realize, oh yeah, my parents were lying to me about the fairy godmother. But the child isn't going to be traumatized or any shit like that, right? But there are other lies that might be small or subtle, but they accumulate. And ultimately what will happen is that reality will rise up and kill you. And that's what you want to avoid. What is good process or framework to figure out what is it that you want in life before applying Epicureanism? Uh, my thinking, I've said this before. One of the things that I do is I pay attention to my daydreams very much, because a lot of times my daydreams indicate to me what it is that I really want. Okay, I have certain daydreams, and I imagine certain scenarios that are, of course, fictitious. I mean, Walter Mitty shit. And Walter Mitty, if you don't know, I'll just post it in chat. Walter Mitty is a story. The Secret Life of, there, I posted it in chat. The Secret Life of Walter Mitty is a famous story by James Thurber. And it's a story of a man called Walter Mitty, who was just an accountant or something like that, a very mundane job. But he had such a miserable job that he always imagined himself being like a mountaineer or an adventurer or a pilot or all kinds of stuff. And he had these all sophisticated scenarios, very complex scenarios of very rich interior fantasy life. I tend to have a very rich fantasy life of daydreams and such. And it's very useful to me because it indicates what it is that I really want. Because I daydream about the things that I lack, that I wish I had. And during the periods of my life that I don't have any daydreams, those are the periods in my life that I have been truly happiest, because I'm doing everything that I really want to do. So anyway, to answer your point, Vikram, a very good way to figure out what you want is to pay attention to your daydreams, because your daydreams are your unconscious way of expressing to you what it wants, what it lacks, what it needs. Okay? It's sort of like, pregnant women. A lot of times they'll tell their husband, oh, it's 3 a.m, but please, can you get me anchovies or get me an avocado or get me whatever the fuck, right? And what's happening is that, see, her body is craving certain minerals that are in that food. Now, her body, of course, does not know this. It just knows that that food, it really wants to eat that food because that food has something necessary, some vitamin or some mineral or something or other that is necessary for the pregnant woman, for the child that she's growing in her womb. And that's where a lot of those food cravings come from. In fact, it's been proven that a lot of food cravings, if not most food cravings, are because the body needs a certain mineral or certain nutrient in that particular food. And it sends up the signal, but via the unconscious, that food is required, and you get this craving for sushi or whatever the fuck, right? And it's that. Same with daydreams. Lots of times your daydreams are your subconscious's way of sending up the message of what you lack in life that you need. No different than a food craving, okay? So pay attention to your daydreams. Yeah, have you read books about how to win friends and influence people? The main driving force of people is to be significant. What is your opinion of that? Yeah, I agree. In fact, that's the way to get girls, make them feel special. Yeah, make them feel really special, love bomb them, and then withdraw it. Okay, that works like a charm every time. You meet somebody, you give them their total attention, and you ask them about themselves, because like Dale Carnegie says, that the one person that people love to hear about is themselves. So you ask them about themselves. You ask them what their interests are, their drives, and you celebrate what they want. And then you withdraw, and they become addicted to you like a drug. Yeah. So anyway, guys, we've been going on for 2 hours, and I have to admit that the Epicurean thing has wiped me out a little bit, because it's you got to be paying attention to this shit. But I hope that this presentation has helped you out. And I realized, as I was putting this together and as I was giving it to you now, it really is pretty much what I think in terms of philosophy. And I cannot emphasize enough this notion that you have to realize that your death, there will be nothing. And therefore focus on your life, because it's so brief, and it's a miracle, okay, that you're alive. Don't mismanage your life, okay? Okay, sure. Andre B, what's your question? Let me pull up Andre B. One last question, and we'll call it webinar. God, I hate it that it takes forever. I just allowed Andre B to get on. It's just goddamn long. Yeah. Oh, there we are. Andre, you there?
Hey, Coach.
How's it going?
First off, I'd like to thank you for being a father figure for me for the past 4 years. My situation is a bit complicated as both my parents have passed away and I'm a bit stranded in a sense, but your video have definitely helped me by giving me life structure. My question is...
I'm glad. Thank you. Thank you very much.
What would your thinking be in a situation like this? Like, should this affect my future plans in any ways?
What are you talking about specifically? I don't know what the subject of your question is.
So it's like both my parents have passed away, with my mom passing away last year. Like, should this affect my future plans? Because I was doing the decades planning thing.
Yeah.
So should this be I don't know, like an important factor in my decision-making process?
How would it be an important factor in your decision-making process?
Like, for example, if I choose to have children, I wouldn't necessarily have like grandparents for the kids. Would that... Yeah, I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. Would that...
Well, I mean, it's unfortunate that your children will not have grandparents. It's unfortunate. Is that a reason not to have children? I'm asking you.
I mean, the way I'm saying things.
Let me put it this way: would you prefer not to exist because you did or did not have grandparents? Come on, you see.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sad that your children will not have grandparents, but that's not a reason not to have children or to have children, as the case may be. Okay, I mean, that's just like it's not a reason. It's just not a reason.
No,
okay?
I guess this is away from the point. So my main question is, what are the advantages of this situation? Because I want to see the positive side. And how would the teachings of Epicureanism apply to a situation like this?
Well, I'm trying to think of what they talk about grief, and I don't think they talk about it much. But what I do think is that, see, there's no advantage to somebody dying. There's no way to get something good out of it, unless it was like some, parents that you hated who happened to be billionaires. But other than that, I see no way that it could be beneficial in any way. See, the tragedy of the death of parents is, it's a tragedy on the one hand, but it's inevitable. I mean, let me put it this way. If my children die before I do, it would break my heart in a way that I would never recover from. And parents who have lost a child, they never recover from that. Okay. Whereas it's normal and natural for a child to eventually lose his parents because his parents are older than him. It's natural. Okay. So the fact that your parents have died, of course, it's sad. And it seems to me that you haven't reconciled yourself to this. Now, my suggestion, and you guys know that I've taken psychedelics quite a bit. And it's become, for me, something that I realize it's very, very important and very, very useful. I would recommend that you take like half a tab of acid or take some mushrooms. And when you go on a trip, think about your parents and try to come to grips with the fact that your parents have died. Now, why am I talking about, getting high over your parents? I know it sounds counterintuitive, but the fact is that one of the powerful things about psychedelics is that it allows you to reconcile yourself to ugly or difficult truths that you find difficult to face or that are dominating your attention. Now, a lot of research has been done recently insofar as psychedelics with terminally ill patients. And terminally ill patients, they have cancers and whatnot, and they are going to die, no question. And they were extremely depressed or extremely unhappy or fighting this destiny and not reconciled to it. And after their psychedelic experience, they had become reconciled to the fact that they were going to die. They had not ceased fighting, but rather realized and accepted this truth. Because what happens is that it's quite natural for human beings to find it very difficult to accept immutable truths. Your parents died, and that's a tragedy. And I assume that you love them very much, and that's perfectly normal. And the fact that they're gone, it hurts you. It hurts you, and you can't get over it. But you have to get over it. You have to reconcile yourself to this reality. It's not something that you forget about them, but rather in your heart you say, they're gone, and I accept this. I don't like it, but I've accepted it. And you and I are talking now, and it doesn't sound like you're accepting it. You can't get over it. And this is a bad thing because it distracts you from living your life. Your inability to get over the loss of your parents prevents you from moving forward with your life. In fact, you're asking me, the question you were asking me is whether you should have children or not because they won't have grandparents. And that's a crazy question. I mean, I'm not putting you down, and I don't mean to say it in an insulting way at all. But what I'm saying is that, see, you have to figure out a way to reconcile yourself to the fact that your parents have passed. And one thing that I have experienced, because it's helped me to reconcile myself to certain things that I'm not going to discuss here, but I can assure you that psychedelics, mushrooms, or LSD, they helped me to reconcile myself to certain things that were very hurtful and difficult for me. And perhaps it's just a suggestion, but it could have the same effect for you. Now, in the chat, I'm writing up the title of a book. I've recommended it several times. The book called How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. I'm putting it there in the chat.
Yep.
Oops, Michael. Well, that's Michael. It's a very, very good book. It's an extremely serious book, and it operates on multiple levels. It talks about psychedelics generally, the history of psychedelics, the current research into psychedelics, and especially in its use for therapy for people who are normal, which is interesting. Because, see, it's not so much people who are crazy who are benefiting from psychedelics. It's rather people like yourself who are normal, but who have something that weighs on them, that's tripping them up. And from the little you've told me, it seems that this is tripping you up. And I'm telling you this in the most compassionate way. I don't mean to put you down in any way, okay? I want to make that really, really clear, okay? It's perfectly understandable how difficult the loss of your parents is, but you can't allow it to dominate your life. You know who would be most opposed to you allowing your parents' death to dominate your life? Your parents. They themselves would not want you to dwell on it and be unreconciled to their deaths, because they would want you to live a happy and fulfilling life. Your mother has died over a year ago, right?
Yeah.
That's what I understand you telling me. Okay. And it's still weighing on you. So you have to work on this problem of reconciling yourself. I suggest this, like I said, I put it in the chat, How to Change Your Mind. Read that book. And once you've read it, and it talks a lot about the safety of psychedelics and how you're not going to jump out of a window or some foolishness like that. You'll be perfectly fine. I would recommend that you would you take a trip or two to reconcile yourself to this, you know? And that's my suggestion. I hope this helps.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No problem. Anything else on your mind?
That's it. I'll look into it.
Yeah, please do. Okay, guys, I'm going to end the stream. And yeah, like I said, my what I said before, Epicureanism is pretty much where I'm at, with that addendum to a preference hedonism, of trying to get my way, basically, because that's what preference hedonism it really is. It's getting your way, getting the things that you want. Okay, so I would suggest you check it out. I think it's really useful. And yeah, so anyway, next week I don't know what I'll be talking about next week. Probably NFTs. because that's like the coming thing. Everybody's talking about it. It's like the coming thing. And like I said, it has a lot of implications, not only in the art market, but in the equities market, which I think is really, really interesting. So until then, thank you so much. And I will catch you next time.